Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Now, obviously, I don't normally do interviews for my YouTube channel, so this is a bit of a first, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to talk to my dear friend Amanda Glover about some, well, rather groundbreaking research that she's been doing, some research that I'm really, really excited about, and which concerns this lady that I've got over my shoulder here. It's linked to Anne Boleyn. So this is Amanda Glover, who I'm going to be talking to. So Amanda, let's start with you telling us a bit about yourself first and how you came to be interested in Tudor history.
Yes, well, thanks very much for having me first, Claire.
It's a pleasure.
I'm a retired lawyer, solicitor by profession. I've spent all my working life in private practice. I've always been interested in history. I don't know why. I can't remember a time when I wasn't interested in history. My immediate family have never shown the remotest interest. I think Tudor history became a bit of a passion, probably similar to everyone else. I read some novels when I was a child. Margaret Irwin, I seem to remember, wrote about Elizabeth. And then later, of course, we have the series Six Wives of Henry VIII and Elizabeth R. And when I retired, I had some time for myself. So I decided to start reading more seriously. And I thought, oh, well, let's go a bit further and do some research. So that's how it started.
And your research has been into a document, a letter that is linked to Anne Boleyn, and it's sort of commonly known as the "From the Lady in the Tower" letter. But how did you come to be interested in this document in particular?
Well, I always like a mystery, and I started getting interested in Anne Boleyn and reading about her, and read this letter, and I read it again, and I thought this is a really fascinating letter. I wonder if it really is genuine or not. And then I saw Sandra Fasoli's book. She's written an entire book on the subject, and I read that, and that got me really hooked. And I started thinking, well, what other research can we do? They've tried to establish provenance. This is a letter that's more or less acknowledged by everyone, not to have been written by Anne herself, but she may have dictated it, or it may be a copy taken by Thomas Cromwell at the time. It's not even signed by her. So how do we go about finding out one way or another whether it was from her? Other people have looked at the style of the handwriting and the style of the language. But that's all very subjective, really. There's not a hard and fast answer as to whether this language would have been Anne's style, especially since we have very few letters from her. So I thought, what about the paper? Let's see if we can investigate the actual age of the paper. And that's what I started to do. And investigated how I could go about that. So the first thing I did was look into carbon dating, because I think everyone's heard about carbon dating. But Oxford University made that clear to me that it wouldn't really be appropriate. It gives too wide a range in the 16th century. They may say it was, let's say, 1650 or 1550 plus or minus 50 odd years. So then I started investigating the actual process of handmade paper at the time. And I came across watermarks. And I discovered that that was a really good way of ascertaining the age of handmade paper. These days, a watermark may last for many, many decades. You can still buy writing paper that's got watermarks on it, but they don't change from one decade to the next. But with the handmade ones, they were very regularly changed, because what's called the mould, which actually makes the paper, the frame that you use to make the paper, that had the watermark on it, which is a tiny, tiny little mark made from bending very fine wire tying it onto the mould, that naturally made the watermark. And it didn't last that long because it was constantly being dragged through the stock, the pulp of, if you like, liquid paper. So that was a really good way of ascertaining the age.
So did you just happen to notice this watermark on photos of the letter online?
No, I couldn't see the watermark at all online.
Okay.
And this document isn't normally available for inspection because it's so delicate. But the British Library, I contacted them. They very kindly gave me consent, first of all, to look at it in the main manuscript room. And they did provide me with what's called a light sheet, which is literally looks like a sheet of A4 paper that lights up. So I put that underneath the letter, and it did then show the watermark. So that was wonderful. So I knew that by then it was definitely written on paper, not parchment. There was a watermark. And then I asked if I could come back and if there was any chance of being able to look at the paper in a better environment, a dark room. I actually said, have you got any broom cupboards available that I can go and hide in and have a look at it? But they provided me with a room, switched the lights off, gave me, again, a light sheet, and they actually helped me. Andrea Clark from the British Library very kindly actually helped me deal with it because two of us really needed to handle it.
Yeah.
Because light, taking photographs and very, very carefully handling it. So that was great, and it showed up really well.
Must have been amazing to see that letter in the flesh, though, as well.
It was. Yeah, I didn't really know what to expect when I went, but the letter itself is bound into a whole volume of other letters, other really important, well-known letters, all of which had been damaged by fire in 1731, because this letter was part of what's called the Cotton Library. And, of course, I couldn't resist having a quick look through to see what else there was. Very carefully. And it was amazing. I saw letters that I knew from Elizabeth when she was the Lady Elizabeth, just there in front of me. I'd seen transcripts before. Letter from the Lady Mary to her father, really grovelling letter after she'd been let back into favour. But actually seeing this letter that I'd read about so much in the flesh, it was amazing.
Yeah, it's quite humbling, I think. I mean, when I held Anne's Book of Hours at Hever, I don't know, it just brings you so much closer to that person.
Yeah,
it's a very strange feeling. It's quite emotional, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very emotional, but absolutely amazing feeling.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you got to see it. But this is just one copy of the letter, isn't it? So, I mean, are you researching the other copies too? And what do we know about them?
Yeah, I am now. Until my research, I think everyone's assumed that the burnt copy, the one I was looking at, was the first one.
Okay.
And the argument was that it was either an original letter that Anne had dictated, or it was a copy that Thomas Cromwell had taken for his own records, and that he was supposed to have handed the original to Henry VIII. But my research showed that the paper on which the letter was written was probably manufactured, well, certainly manufactured in the first decade of the 17th century. I would say probably 1605, 1610, that sort of date. So that still makes it the first known extant copy, but of course, there's no way was it an original dictated by Anne or a copy for Cromwell, Thomas Cromwell. So there's another copy, again in the British Library, in the Stowe manuscripts. We don't know who wrote it. He's called the Feathery Scribe because of the style of his handwriting. And he's known to have worked roughly between 1625 and 1640, but plus or minus a few years. And there seems to be a third one somewhere in the British Library, which I need to research on further. The only reason I haven't is that there's been a cyber attack, a major cyber attack at the British Library since last October. So a lot of these documents are not available at the moment. So yeah, I want to look at all of those to see if there are any discrepancies, to try to find out, in particular with the Cotton Library one, who the scribe was. Up until now, everyone's been looking for a scribe in 1536 to try to compare handwriting.
Yes.
Of course, we need to be looking for a scribe writing about 1605, 1610. So I'm going to start hunting around for that period, maybe going through the Cotton Library manuscripts to see if we can find some similar writing, to see if we can identify him.
Exciting.
So there's, lots of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, what's rather intriguing is that when you read the early books on the subject, they say that this letter was said to have been found amongst Cromwell's papers.
Yes.
I can't find the origin of who said that it was found amongst Cromwell's papers. I think that's very important to try to establish whether or not it is authentic.
Yeah. No one seems to cite a source for that, do they? I mean, it's Bishop Burnet says it, doesn't he, in his book History of the Reformation?
Bishop Burnet actually says that he saw it amongst Cromwell's papers. But he doesn't say where Cromwell's papers were at the time. And rather interestingly, I mean, he wasn't born until 1643. And obviously the burnt Cotton Letter, we were saying about 1605, 1610, if that's what he saw amongst Cromwell's papers, it must have been sitting around there for quite a long time, but clearly not put there during Cromwell's life. So if it is a forgery, someone's put it in Cromwell's papers, if Burnet is right. But the odd thing is that someone who published earlier than Bishop Burnet, Lord Herbert of Cherbury, didn't say that he had seen it in Cromwell's papers. He said that it is said to have been in Cromwell's papers. Okay. So he hadn't gone back to this original alleged source that Burnet seems to think he had done. So that's something else I want to try to find out where Cromwell's papers were. And
perhaps it's just like, Chinese whispers, just people repeating something that they've heard. But yes, which of Cromwell's papers?
Where are they? Who had them? Because was it Burnet just saying he's found it amongst Cromwell's papers in the Cotton Library? If he has, then I think it makes it more likely that it is a forgery, because the Cotton Library was assembled over many, many years. It wasn't just put together as a whole. There wasn't a big pile labelled Cromwell's papers that were all found from a single source.
Just because it's kind of with other things that were related to Cromwell doesn't mean it came together with those, does it?
No, because Cotton collected, the three generations of the Cotton family just collected. As I gather, they didn't keep it in the order that they obtained it in. They put it in more or less in date order as they acquired it. So it would be amongst Cromwell's papers if Cotton had acquired several of Cromwell's papers. You'd expect this letter, contemporaneous date, to be there. If you see what I mean.
Just get more questions than answers, don't you, when you start researching?
Absolutely. So it may just be that Burnet has misled us all.
But there's so many threads to this that, I mean, there has been research done on this letter before, the various copies of it. How does your research differ from what's been done in the past? Nobody's looked at the watermark before, have they?
Nobody's looked at the paper at all. Nobody's looked at the watermark. So I think most people were starting from the premise that this letter was written in 1536, and this is the real deal, apart from those who thought it was a forgery. But even those who thought it was a forgery, I think, may have been thinking, well, some of them were thinking it was an early forgery. It has to have been forged before 1649 if it is a forgery.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's when the first published book referred to it.
Yeah.
So that's where my research differs from anyone else, that it's hard physical evidence rather than supposition about the style of writing or the content. I think this is undoubted proof that this particular document in the Cotton Library was made, the paper was manufactured in the first decade of the 17th century.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. There's so many threads to now follow through, aren't there?
A lot to follow through.
I mean, will you be able to put the other documents, the other copies, will you be able to put those on a light sheet and see if they've got watermarks?
Yes, hopefully, when the British Library sorted themselves out,
Yes.
it won't be for another several months. Hopefully, I will be able to go back and just check those out.
Yeah.
And that might give us a date order as to when these copies were taken. I think that could be quite interesting.
Yeah.
But there are other interesting aspects to these letters. The Stowe Library one, the Feathery Scribes, has an annotation at the top that says it was found amongst Cromwell's papers.
Okay.
So why would the scribe say that unless he himself had seen it in Cromwell's papers?
Yeah.
And the Cotton Library one doesn't say that. Now, admittedly, it's burned, but the top part doesn't seem to be burned. So I don't think the Cotton Library had those words written on it. So if the Feathery Scribe had been paid to copy the Cotton Library one, I don't think he would have written at the top, found amongst Cromwell's papers, because the Cotton Library one didn't have those words on it.
Yeah.
So it's all very complex. Yeah. Also, the Cotton Library one has a little anecdote written at the end. That's not on Feathery Scribes.
Okay.
Which is odd.
So tell us more about this anecdote that's added.
In essence, it seems to be a note written after the letter from Anne, if she dictated it, saying she was asked again to confess her faults to the king. And she said that she couldn't do that because she hasn't committed any offence, but that the king had raised her first from an ordinary woman, then to a marquis, then to queen, and as he couldn't raise her any higher on earth, by martyrdom, he was making her a queen or a saint in heaven.
Okay.
And that's supposed to be, everyone thinks that's reporting what Anne may have said when she was asked again after this letter was written, if indeed it's not a forgery. That seems to have been her response, which is another odd thing. It's not mentioned, as I said, it's not on the Stowe Library version. And Bishop Burnet mentions the events in the anecdote, but he doesn't say that it was written at the end of this letter.
Okay.
And he also seems to know the date the conversation took place, and that date's not on the anecdote. So we have to ask ourselves, did he get that from somewhere else? Some primary source that's now gone.
Yes. Yeah, you do wonder, with that fire, the Cotton Library, just how many things were completely destroyed and what's missing.
Yeah, there could be a lot gone.
Yeah.
And also people just didn't keep records perfectly. They were the really serious official things like Acts of Parliament. The ministers may have taken them home for themselves. I know Lord Burleigh took home virtually everything he had.
Yes.
And then secretaries may have used them, taken them. When Cromwell was executed, what happened to his papers? Were they seized? Did his secretary grab some for himself?
Yeah.
It's just impossible to know.
Yes, because papers don't seem to have been inventoried, do they? When someone, fell from power and, was tried and executed, their possessions, their property and any jewels and perhaps books, but you don't ever really see in inventories papers being mentioned, do you? So
Quite rare. The Lisle papers, I think, is an exception.
yes.
They were arrested, I think, in Calais, if I remember, and their papers were taken just in case they could find any evidence of treason there.
They're one of my favourite Tudor sources, the Lisle papers. I love them.
Yeah, brilliant. But I think that might be the exception that proves the rule.
Yes. Oh,
They could
very frustrating.
be festering somewhere. We just don't know.
No. So going back to the letter that you've looked at, I mean, I feel that you've proved conclusively with the watermark that this letter is not an original. It does not date to 1536. Anne didn't write it, and it wasn't dictated in May 1536. But do you personally believe that there is an original somewhere that either Anne wrote herself or that she dictated? And if so, why do you believe that? And if not, do you believe that too?
When I first found these two watermarks that matched the watermark on the Tower letter, I thought, there we go, it's definitely a forgery.
Yes.
End of story. It's a forgery. Anne never wrote it. Someone's made it up. But then I started thinking about it again. I'm really not sure. I am still on the fence. But one of the reasons that makes me think perhaps it is real, perhaps it's genuine, is that why would anyone forge it? Because there's no benefit to this person. Let's pick the 1610 date. Let's say he wrote this letter in 1610. It wasn't discovered, as far as we're aware, for several decades after that. So he hasn't made any money from it. He hasn't gone to Sir Robert Cotton and said, look what I found, you want to buy this from me. He's just slipped it amongst Cromwell's papers and disappeared. May have died before it was even discovered. And that's something that makes me think, well, forgers normally do something for a financial gain. Yes. And I can't see any gain for that. Also, it must have been, if it was a forger, it must have been a highly educated person. And of course, in 1610, that rules out most of the population.
Yeah.
He must have had access to Cromwell's papers, although I think more people were free and easy about giving access in those days. As long as you were dressed well, you were given access. And he must have known his history, because the facts in the letter are correct. And do bear in mind that 70 years has passed now since Anne was executed, so he must have known the events that were going on. So I really don't know, but I think there is a chance that there is something out there, or there was something out there. As I said, largely because I can't think of why anyone would forge it. And also these little anomalies about the anecdote, the added anecdote. I mean, that would be a brilliant thing for a forger to have done. Let's just add this anecdote to make it look really good. And as I said, the discrepancies, the slight differences in the Stowe version from the Burnet version makes me wonder, well, was there an original that they were both copying from at some stage? But I really don't know.
I mean, there was this idea, I can't remember who said it, about it being like perhaps it was an Elizabethan school exercise, but that doesn't fit with the fact that there are these other copies that they're not children that have created these, definitely not, with the feathery scribe being involved. I don't think that's
No,
relevant.
and it's obviously
But
post Elizabethan.
yes, yes, definitely with the watermark on that one.
But I don't think that in
Go
the
on.
early century they'd set homework like that.
No,
I think that's
no,
more a modern type of thing. They'd be
yeah,
learning Latin and Greek and all this.
yes.
I don't
Sorry,
think
my
some.
dogs are just trying to get in on
Oh,
the
right.
interview. Yeah, I mean, I would love to think that Anne did write it, that she managed to have her say, even if Henry VIII never saw it, because you probably, as one of the people like Cromwell and Audley and Risley, and that, you probably wouldn't want the king to see it. But I'd like to think that she did get her say, because it's quite impassioned at points, isn't it?
It is. I would like to think that as well, but obviously I've got to stay objective. But that's another
Yeah.
thing. If she had consent to write to the king, and there is a hint that Kingston, the jailer, was asked to convey a message, and maybe he did put it in writing.
Yeah.
There's only a hint of that. We don't have the full script, again, because of the fire. If Henry was expecting a letter from Anne, maybe Cromwell had to give it to Henry.
Yes.
Maybe it even antagonised Henry.
Yeah. Yes, because it wouldn't be an easy read for him, would
No,
it?
it certainly wouldn't. Henry, you're going to hell. I'm going to pray for you, but you're going to hell if you carry on this way.
Yeah.
Then maybe he did see it, and maybe the original he put in the fire and it's disappeared for that reason.
Oh, yes. That could be our answer.
It could be. So,
Yeah.
yes, there's a lot of research that needs to be done still.
Yes. I do find it interesting. I mean, people have said before that one of the points why they feel that it's a forgery is because it's signed Anne Boleyn, that no Queen Anne Boleyn, and they feel very strongly that Anne at that point would be calling herself Queen, and she'd be using the spelling that she favoured. But then if it's dictated, it would be the person that's the scribe that would
Yeah.
be just sort of adding her name. Although, yeah, if they're just copies, they wouldn't bear her signature. They would just be adding her name, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. And would a forger be doing that? I think a forger would be more likely to be signing off as Anne the Queen.
Yeah.
But I think it was let's say Anne did write it. I think it was a very, very clever move of hers. She's saying to Henry, let's go back to the good days when I was Anne Boleyn and you were in love with me. If you can remember those days, don't kill me now because of what you've been told by my enemies.
Yeah.
But I don't know if a forger would have come up with that. I think it's a very clever thing to have done.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love there to be an original out there. I'd love to think Anne did it the same way that, I mean, Anne of the Thousand Days with that wonderful scene in the tower with Geneviève Bujold. You really, you wish that Anne had had the opportunity to have her say in those dark days. So, yeah.
And
Yes, my dog is agreeing with me in the background there.
Right. Mine's got rather bored with history. She's gone to sleep now.
So are you going to be doing, well, you've already said this really, you are going to be doing a lot more research into
I think I am.
Yeah.
I was going to leave it here because I'm also doing some research relating to Queen Elizabeth, which I want to get back to. But I keep coming back to this letter. I don't like leaving questions half answered. But it's a vast area to research.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to look at every aspect of the letter from whichever angle I can, and try to trace where Cromwell's papers went.
Yeah.
There's talk that maybe his secretary, Ralph Sadler, had
Yeah.
some. Maybe we can look into him, what happened to his papers. I think it's a long shot, and it might be that we find absolutely nothing, or we might. At best, I think it's going to be circumstantial evidence as to whether it really existed or not.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, you never know.
No.
You never know what's out there. And you mentioned that you're working on other projects as well. So can you tell us a bit about those? I mean, you don't have to tell us anything that's top secret.
No, it's based on Elizabeth I, and I'm writing a book and researching and writing a book, which hopefully will be complementary to other books on Elizabeth.
Yeah.
It's not a beginning, middle, and ending type of thing. She's born, didn't get married, and died. It's going to be bits and pieces that hopefully will be interesting to the reader. That's taking a little bit of time as well. And the research, again, it's got harder with the British Library not being fully functional at the moment. But yeah, I keep getting back to Anne's letter.
Yeah. Well, some things just grab hold of you, I think, and don't let go until you've researched them and researched them and researched them.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go through everything very minutely to see if I can find any slight differences, which may lead me to think that there is a document out there that we just don't know about.
Be in a private collection somewhere. Someone could have it without even knowing they've got it. It could be in a bank vault or
Absolutely. Yeah. Or it could have just been destroyed. It could have been thrown out with the rubbish 100 years ago. There's a lot of documents that have been destroyed.
Yes.
They've been put into boxes and left and rotted. And it could have been one of those, or it could be in somebody's attic now. Or misfiled someone.
Yes. Yeah.
Could be sitting in official government records, misfiled.
Yeah, and there could be further copies as well, just, that scribes have done. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your research with us. I will link to the article that you wrote kindly for the Tudor Society, because that's got a transcript of the letter as well, and it goes into more details about the watermarks. So that'll be complementary to this video. So I'll share that as well, so that everyone can enjoy that and find out more about your research. But thank you so very much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Very much enjoyed it. Thank you.
And I wish you so much luck with getting back to your research. And the British Library, we wish them luck as well.
I'm certainly going to need the luck with the Anne Boleyn letter, but I'll try it.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much for having me.